The sun hung high over Sunnyvale Estates like it was personally approving every blade of grass. Perfect lawns rolled out in identical shades of HOA-approved emerald. Mailboxes stood at regulation height, and American flags fluttered in synchronized patriotism. On paper, it was paradise. In reality, it was a velvet-lined cage run by Linda Voss, the newly crowned HOA president who wore her pastel cardigan like body armor and spoke in that syrupy voice that made you want to check your wallet. I was Mark Thompson, longtime resident, quiet guy in the corner house with the slightly wilder hydrangeas. Everyone called me the legacy guy behind my back, like I was some dusty relic who'd been here since the bulldozers left 15 years ago. They had no idea. Back then, I'd been the one who drafted every covenant, every bylaw, every single comma that now chained their precious little kingdom together. I'd buried my control in a Delaware trust called Heritage Holdings, layered it behind proxies and shell entities no bored housewife with a spreadsheet could ever untangle. 91% of the weighted voting power sat in my name. Invisible, patient, waiting. I let them forget me. I let Linda forget me. She hadn't forgotten how to smile while she ruined lives. Though, it started small, the way all HOA nightmares do. A Tuesday afternoon email blast titled Community Standards Refresh Because We Care. Linda's photo smiled down from the header like a step-forward wife who discovered power tools. New paint palette. New flag policy. New zero tolerance for anything that might offend the delicate eyes of people who paid $600 a month in dues to feel superior. My hydrangeas, those beautiful, rebellious blue explosions, were now non-compliant vegetation. Fine number 1 arrived in a crisp envelope, $250. I paid it. Silently. Watched. Linda loved an audience. At the monthly board meeting, she'd stand at the little podium in the community center, pearls gleaming, and deliver sermons about preserving our legacy, while her husband nodded like a bobblehead in the front row. "We're shedding the old skin," she declared one night, voice dripping with faux compassion. "New vision, new blood, new standards." Translation: anyone who remembered how this place actually got built was now dead weight. I sat in the back row, arms crossed, letting her words wash over me like cheap perfume. She never once looked my direction. Why would she? I was just Mark, the guy who mowed on Saturdays, the guy who never complained. Inside, I was already mapping every exit she didn't know existed. The first Real shot came on a crisp October morning. I woke to find my community pool key card had been deactivated overnight. No warning email. No polite knock, just a cheerful automated message. Access temporarily suspended pending compliance review. My trash cans, which I dared to leave at the curb until 8:07 a.m. instead of 8 o'clock sharp, earned me fine number 2. Then came the letter about my unapproved front door wreath. Each violation was logged in the new Sunnyvale Standards portal she'd launched with all the pride of someone who'd just invented sliced bread. I didn't rage. I didn't call. I simply logged into the system. She didn't know I still had admin-level access to, courtesy of the original developer covenants I'd written myself. I watched her change permissions in real time. Watch her rename the Amenities Committee to Lifestyle Enhancement Task Force. Watched her consultants, two 20-somethings in Lululemon who used synergy like punctuation, nod along while she gutted decades of quiet functionality. She thought she was modernizing. She was sawing through the branch she was sitting on, and I had the only chainsaw. By November, the fines had snowballed into something almost artistic. $1,800 total. My hydrangeas were now persistent violators. My American flag, regulation size, regulation mounting, had been deemed slightly off-center and therefore disrespectful. Neighbors started whispering. Someone left a passive-aggressive note on my door about community harmony. Linda posted a glowing neighborhood update on the private Facebook group. Proud to report, we're finally addressing those legacy holdouts who refuse to evolve. Progress isn't always comfortable. Friends, she smirked in every selfie like she'd already won the war. I smiled back at my screen. Because some of us don't need revenge speeches. Some of us already own the deed to the battlefield. The courtesy meeting arrived via certified mail the week before Thanksgiving. Voluntary compliance discussion. The subject line read, as if anyone ever volunteered for a firing squad. I showed up at the community center at 9:02, sharp enough to look professional, late enough to make her wait. The room smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Linda sat at the head of the folding table like a budget dictator, her husband hovering behind her with a manila folder. Two other board members, both handpicked by her, flanked her like nervous poodles. "Mark," she began, voice honeyed with fake concern. "We've been so patient, but the board feels your continued resistance is affecting property values. We're restructuring for the future. Your non-compliance simply doesn't fit the new vision anymore." She slid the folder across the table exactly like someone pushing away a dirty napkin. Inside, a predated voluntary resignation of rights and privileges form. Severance of amenities access. Final fine schedule. A polite suggestion I sell and move before things got unpleasant. No mention of the original covenants. No mention of the weighted voting clause buried in Article 7.3, the one I'd written 15 years ago that said any attempt to strip rights from a stakeholder holding more than 20% required unanimous board approval, excluding the stakeholder himself. I signed it. One smooth stroke. No questions. No drama. Linda leaned back, smug enough to float. Her husband actually clapped once, like I just performed a trick. The other board members exhaled in visible relief. I stood, coat over my arm, and took one slow photo of the signed document with my phone, timestamp visible, her Rolex glittering in the corner like a guilty witness. She didn't notice. She was too busy savoring her victory. As I walked out into the crisp autumn air, I didn't head home. I sat in my car, engine off, and dialed the single number from the burner I kept in a glove box. "Kendra," I said when she answered. "It's time." No hello. No small talk. Just a fuse I'd planted years ago. The digital notice hit the HOA legal inbox at 4:42 p.m. Certified. Hard copy delivered by courier. Signature required. Subject line, Notice of Majority Interest Holder Enforcement. Article 7.3a. The language inside was colder than a Minnesota winter. It cited my controlling position through Heritage Holdings. It declared every action taken against me since October procedurally void. It froze all further board decisions until a full weighted vote ratification occurred. Linda's little restructuring had just been legally neutered. Her presidency now required reconfirmation. And guess who held the controlling 91%? I didn't storm the next meeting. I simply waited while the panic rippled outward like a stone dropped in a very expensive koi pond. By Thursday morning, the community center phone lines were melting. Board members who'd happily nodded along to Linda's new vision were suddenly discovering their email inboxes flooded with legal speak they couldn't pronounce. The private Facebook group, once a shrine to her pastel perfection, went radio silent, except for one terrified post from a neighbor asking if anyone else had received a mysterious certified letter. Linda still tried to pretend nothing had changed. She showed up at the emergency board meeting wearing her power pearls and an extra layer of concealer to hide the stress lines. "Just a misunderstanding," she told the group. Voice still syrupy, but now cracking at the edges. "Some dusty old clause that doesn't even apply anymore. We'll handle it in-house." I sat in the back row again. Same calm posture. Same crossed arms. She refused to look at me, but I saw the way her hands trembled when she gripped the podium. The general counsel, some overpaid attorney from the management company, finally spoke up after 30 minutes of her tap dancing. Mrs. Voss. The filing references weighted voting rights held by Heritage Holdings. We don't appear to have current records showing who actually controls that entity. Linda's laugh came out too sharp. It's probably some passive investor from out of state. They'll sell once they realize how much work this is. We just need to. I stood up. The room went graveyard quiet. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Heritage Holdings is me. I pulled the full covenant packet from my briefcase. Original notarized pages, color-coded tabs, the works, and laid on the table. Article 7.3A glowed under the fluorescent lights like a neon sign that read checkmate. Linda's face did something interesting. First disbelief, then the slow dawning horror of someone realizing the castle she'd been ruling was actually a cardboard cutout built on my foundation. Her husband's bobblehead motion stopped mid-nod. The counsel started flipping pages so fast the paper hissed. Whispers erupted. Someone actually gasped. An actual theatrical gasp like we were in a soap opera. Linda recovered enough to try the classic Karen pivot. Well, even if that's technically true, the board has already voted on new standards and invalid, I said quietly. Every vote taken after my rights were stripped without unanimous consent, excluding myself, is null, including your presidency. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the HVAC unit humming its little mechanical panic. I'll let it stretch. 7 full minutes of beautiful, suffocating quiet while Linda's empire of petty rules crumbled in real time. Her consultants shifted uncomfortably in their Lululemon. One board member started frantically Googling on her phone under the table. Finally, I spoke again. Voting members have received the full packet. Bylaws attached. Procedural breaches documented. excuse me. Covenant conflicts outlined in Exhibit C. Shall we vote on the motion to revoke the current president's appointment due to fiduciary breach? The avatars on the Zoom screen for the absent members started flashing green one by one. Yes, yes, yes. Linda's own hand-picked allies folded like cheap lawn chairs. Even her husband wouldn't meet her eyes. Motion carried. Linda stood up slowly, the way people do when they realize the floor is suddenly lava. Her pearls looked ridiculous now, like costume jewelry on a deposed queen. This is outrageous. I built this community's standards. You can't just. I didn't, I said, still calm. The covenants you swore to uphold did. I reached into my bag and handed her a fresh manila folder. Crisp. Labeled. Time-stamped. Inside, her own voluntary resignation, form she'd forced on me, now stamped void. Next to it, the interim president appointment documentation signed and notarized under the very clause she'd ignored. My name, my signature, my rules. Security, 2 polite retirees in navy polos who'd been community volunteers for years, appeared at the door. Not to drag her out, just to document the transfer. Badge deactivation. Keycard return. Access logs already scrubbing her administrative privileges. Linda looked at the folder like it might bite her. You're seriously doing this? In front of everyone? What does this prove? I finally met her eyes. It proves you never bothered to read the document you pretended to enforce on everyone else. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out except a tiny strangled sound that might have been the death rattle of her ego. The room smelled like leather chairs and freshly served karma. The security volunteers waited patiently. Linda finally took the folder, clutched it to her pastel chest like a shield, and walked toward the door with the stiff gait of someone whose entire identity had just been overwritten by procedure. No one applauded. No one jeered. They just watched in that perfect suburban silence that says more than screaming ever could. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded, to me at least, exactly like a participation trophy hitting the trash can. The quarterly newsletter came out 2 weeks later. Page 9. Tiny paragraph buried between the new flowerbed guidelines and the updated trash can schedule. President transition effective immediately due to governance review. Interim leadership appointed per foundational covenants pending full ratification. No names. No drama. Just cold, sterile language that somehow made Linda's entire reign sound like a software update that failed QA. But the neighborhood knew. Oh, they knew. Whispers turned into group chats. Group chats turned into cautious knocks on my door from people who'd previously crossed the street to avoid me. We had no idea, they'd say, eyes wide. We thought she was, protecting us. One woman actually brought cookies like a peace offering. I accepted them. Politely. The hydrangeas stayed exactly where they were, wild, blue, and gloriously non-compliant. Linda's Facebook page went dark. Her lifestyle enhancement task force dissolved overnight when the two consultants suddenly remembered they had prior commitments in another state. The new paint palette quietly reverted to the original colors I'd chosen 15 years ago. The pool keycard on my wallet started working again without fanfare. I didn't gloat. I didn't send victory emails. I simply sat back down at my kitchen table, the same one I'd used to draft the original covenants, and opened the community portal. I reversed every single permission change she'd made. I restored the old amenity names. I quietly deleted the standards portal she'd spent thousands on. Systems weren't broken. They'd just been bent by someone who thought she was smarter than the original architecture. The old maintenance coordinator, a guy named Ron who'd been here longer than the asphalt, stopped by one afternoon while I was checking irrigation logs. He paused in the doorway, nodded once, and said, "Glad you're still here." That was it. No speeches. No thank yous. Just the quiet acknowledgement of one builder to another. People started using my real name again instead of that legacy guy. The board, now properly reconstituted, sent me the termination paperwork they'd forced on me with a formal apology buried in the metadata. I signed it, sent it back. They offered to update my title to something grander. I declined. Titles don't run neighborhoods. Covenants do. And the covenants were intact. Every line, every clause, every weighted vote. Linda's house went on the market 3 months later. For sale sign and regulation size. Of course. The listing photos showed the same pastel cardigan draped over a chair like a surrendered flag. Neighbors said she told everyone she was pursuing new opportunities in a less restrictive community. Translation: she'd finally found a place where no one had read the fine print. I watched the moving truck leave from my front window. Hydrangeas blooming defiantly in the background. No smirk. Just the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd never needed to raise his voice to win. The neighborhood settled back into its rhythm. Same lawns. Same flags. Same quiet American dream. Except now, everyone knew the rules weren't written by some pearl-clutching dictator in pastels. They'd been written by the guy who never complained, never posted, never needed the spotlight. And the hydrangeas? They grew even wilder that spring. Because some things refused to be standardized. Spring brought the first real test of the restored order. A new family moved into Linda's old house. Young couple. 2 kids. One very enthusiastic golden retriever. Their first weekend, they left the trash cans out until noon and let the dog dig one enthusiastic hole in the front yard. Under Linda's reign, this would have triggered a fine tsunami and a passive-aggressive neighborhood post about pet waste etiquette. Instead, nothing happened. The portal stayed silent. The board didn't convene an emergency session. I simply sent a polite, welcome email with the actual covenants attached. No lectures, no threats, just the original document I'd written when the streets were still mud. The new neighbors replied with a thank you and a photo of their dog wearing an apologetic bandana. Progress. Meanwhile, the old guard who'd ridden Linda's coattails started quietly updating their resumes. The woman who'd once left me that nasty note about my wreath now waved every morning like we were old friends. The board member who nodded hardest during Linda's sermons suddenly discovered a passion for historical preservation and proposed we restore the original landscaping guidelines, my guidelines. I approved it, quietly, the way a king signs a bill he wrote himself years earlier. One afternoon, I found a small envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a single printed photo of Linda's for sale sign with the words, "Thank you," handwritten in shaky ballpoint. Someone in the neighborhood had a sense of humor. I pinned it to the corkboard in my office next to the original covenant draft. Erase the smirk. I thought. That had always been the thing with Linda. The way she weaponized that condescending smile like the whole neighborhood was her personal Pinterest board, and she was the only one with a vision. She thought silence meant surrender. She thought quiet meant powerless. She thought legacy meant disposable. And now her name didn't even appear in the paperwork that undid her. No dramatic exit interview. No viral Facebook rant. Just overwritten by procedure. The community center bulletin board still had her old community standards refresh poster tacked up, now half covered by a new flyer for the summer block party. Someone had drawn a tiny smiley face over her face with a Sharpie. I left it there. Let the record speak for itself. I never took the president title. Never needed it. The systems ran themselves again. Firewalls of fairness. Compliance bridges built on actual law instead of ego. The audit log showed everything Linda had broken. Overreached permissions. Rewritten rules without vote. Attempted power grabs that nearly triggered the kind of mass exodus that tanks property values. I reversed it all in silence. No finger pointing. Just quiet restoration. The CTO excused me. The new board treasurer passed me in the hallway one day, carrying actual paper copies of the covenants like they were sacred texts. He paused, nodded, and said, "We're reviewing the full weighted voting structure for future transparency." I nodded back. That was enough. No lectures. No power trips. Just the understanding that neighborhoods don't hold together because of pearl-clutching speeches. They hold because someone stayed up at 2 a.m., testing the foundations before anyone else woke up. People started showing up at my door with real problems instead of complaints. A widow down the street worried about her fence height. A young dad needed help with the irrigation schedule. I helped them all. Not because I had to, because the covenants I wrote were designed to protect people, not punish them. Linda had used them like a weapon. I used them like guardrails. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Sunnyvale Estates stopped feeling like a prison with perfect landscaping. It started feeling like the neighborhood I'd actually built 15 years ago, before the Karens of the world decided they could redecorate someone else's dream. Summer arrived with the kind of golden light that makes even the strictest covenants look friendly. The block party went off without a single violation report. Kids ran through sprinklers. Dogs dug holes. Flags waved at slightly different angles, and nobody clutched their pearls. I sat on my porch with a cold beer watching it all. The hydrangeas exploding in triumphant blue behind me, like living proof that wildness and order could coexist when the right person held the pen. Linda's house sold to the Young family. They painted the front door the original color I'd specified in 2010. The golden retriever became the unofficial neighborhood mascot. Life moved on with the quiet efficiency of a well-coded system finally running without interference. I never heard from Linda again. Rumors said she landed in some gated community in Arizona where the HOA president was even stricter. I hoped she found the rule she deserved. Personally, I filed her memory in the same folder I kept the original termination letter she'd forced me to sign, labeled "Erase the Smirk." Every time I opened it, I remembered the exact moment her face realized the branch she'd been sawing was the one I'd built the entire tree on. The board held its annual election in September. I didn't run. Didn't need to. They re-elected the interim team I'd quietly guided into place. The new president, a soft-spoken retired engineer who actually read documents before signing them, sent me a handwritten thank you note. For reminding us what this neighborhood was supposed to be, it read. I framed it next to the covenants. Autumn leaves turned the lawns into a kaleidoscope of approved colors. And I finally took the vacation I never allowed myself while Linda played dictator. 2 weeks in a cabin with no Wi-Fi, no portal alerts, no pastel cardigans in sight. When I returned the community, Portal showed 0 new violation tickets. The hydrangeas had survived without me. The flags still waved. The system held. Because that's what real power looks like, not the loudest voice at the podium, not the most aggressive fine schedule, not the woman who weaponized politeness until it became a cage. Real power is the quiet guy who wrote the rules, waited 15 years, and only used them when someone tried to erase him from his own story. Sunnyvale Estates still looks perfect on the surface. Identical houses, manicured lawns, synchronized flags. But now everyone knows the truth behind the perfection. The man who never complained, never posted, never needed the spotlight, he was never the relic. He was the architect, and the architect never left. He just waited for the right moment to remind everyone whose name was on the deed. The end.